The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. I am coming to you today from Marathon Key, Florida with John Ratliff. So we're down here this week with some CEOs that are coming in this afternoon for, oh, wow, I don't know what that was, for CEO boot camp that John puts on here at his retreat house in Marathon. So I appreciate you letting me be a part of that program for a couple of times now. And I've known John for many years. We can talk a little bit about that as well as we go through this next hour or so. Over the last 2 or 3 months, I've had, I don't know, a half a dozen people email me or text me and just ask, can you connect me with John Ratliff about this Dream On program that I'm hearing about? And I thought, well, I'm going to be with John. Why don't we just put up on a webinar and open it up to everybody and let you guys ask questions? So a big piece of today's content will be asking questions. You can do that in the question box there on the WebEx panel. Just type in a question. Camille is on the line with us as well. We'll get those questions directly to John and get them answered in a timely manner throughout the broadcast. So welcome today.
Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about where the idea from Dream On actually came from.
Well, we should probably back up a step and talk about the industry that we were in and what was going on in the business. So I had about 24 call centers across the United States, many acquired through acquisition, about 650 employees. And of the 650, about 500 of those people were frontline employees. And we were, in our niche of the call center world, we were one of the bigger players in the U.S. Doing the specific thing we were doing, which was customer service. And then I had a peer in Canada who had become a good friend of mine. He had a business in Canada that was pretty similar in size and makeup and philosophy and those things. So we're at a conference in somewhere in the Canadian wilderness, I'm sure. And we're sitting down, we're at the bar, and we're having a beer, and where all good ideas at conferences come from. He turned to me and he said, hey, do you track your frontline employee turnover? I said, yeah, we do. He said, well, what is it? And I said, it's 115%. And he looks me dead in the eye and he goes, that's fantastic. And I thought, what? But he was right. In our industry, 150% was kind of the standard.
So 150 is the standard. You were at 115.
115, and he was
the whole
excited.
world thought you were doing great.
Well, he was excited we were beating the industry average. He was at 130, 135, by the way. He was excited. He was beating the industry average too, which was even worse. But, you know, and it kind of dawned on me in that moment, like, why do we tolerate this? This is ridiculous. There's absolutely, just because the industry says, you know, you turn over 1.5 people a year because it's a crappy job, doesn't mean that that has to be the case. So we're Rockefeller Habits Company at the time and right up until the day we exited. We were pretty disciplined around annual planning, quarterly planning. So luck would have it, we were just coming up on one of our quarterly planning sessions. So I go back and I challenged my team. We went into that planning session and I said, hey, let me tell you about this conversation. And I want to ask everyone why. Why do we tolerate this and, you know, what's going on? So our whole quarterly planning turned into, how do we attack this problem of turnover? What are the things that we're doing that are causing, you know, this turnover problem? And I don't want to hear this, you know, it's what the industry does nonsense. So interestingly enough, too, the hourly employees were turning over at 115%, and the salaried employees were turning over at an annual rate of 3%. So you can imagine the class warfare we had going on there as well. So it was an us versus them. That created a really low trust environment. I mean, all sorts of problems came from that. So our quarterly planning really kind of hones in on this idea of how do we solve the turnover problem. And we, you know, we do what all good rock habits companies do and debate ideas and back and forth, but we wanted to come up with a quarterly theme. And one of our leaders said, well, what if we had, it was a what if we had the Make-A-Wish charity model, but we had it for our internal staff. Like anyone, and it wasn't just hourly, it was anyone in the company, hourly and salary. what if they had an unlimited ability to kind of come to us and make a wish style, say, hey, here's my dream. And we would do 2-day quarterlies. That idea came kind of middle towards the end of the first day. Spent the entire next day building out a program that we ultimately called Dream On. In fact, I have any good quarterly planning ends up with 500 Post-it notes up on the wall, and I still have the Post-it note where we wrote the words Dream On and encircled about 20 times. Yeah. So Dream On, the idea came out of that, and essentially what it was the Make-A-Wish charity model, but for our internal staff. Just to give you kind of the fast forward statistics to the end, we sold our company in 2012, and this was the third quarter of 08 when we launched. From the third quarter of 08 until 2012, we granted over 300, I don't have the exact number, but over 300 dreams in that time. And we did a lot of other work around turnover. This isn't a magic bullet. I think this is part of a broader philosophy.
That's really key.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of rant on that a little bit or talk about that. But this was part of a broader program. But I can tell you, of all the things we did, it was by far the most significant part of the program. And our turnover went from 115% to 18% voluntary turnover when we sold the company.
And how long did it take you guys to go from 115 to 18? It obviously wasn't a quarter. I think some people get started with these programs. They think they're going to be, they turn it on, it's done. It's going to be there. Like, how long was that?
Yeah, no, it's really like a bank account. You make deposits, make deposits, make deposits. I would say that we hit that 18% turnover number probably in about 18 months, actually.
Okay, so it was pretty quick.
Yeah.
What were the other?
Well, that's one of my things. I think there's this mystique that it takes a long time to change a culture in a company. And it's really kind of a side note, but I believe that with the right actions and the right leverage, you can change culture overnight. But you have to be consistent, and more importantly, culture is not about a set of to-dos, and if I do these 5 things, right, culture is going to get better. Culture, to me, is really a philosophy that's deeply embedded inside the company that says, what can we do today to make the experience for the employees better than it was yesterday? And if you don't have the philosophy right, the worst thing you can do is try and change culture by going through a set of to-dos. It really, and everyone wants to know, tell me what to do, tell me what to do, tell me what to do. The problem is if you do the to-dos and you're not philosophically aligned with owning the employee experience, then you end up with cynical employees that understand you're just trying to manipulate.
And I've heard you say before, your managers woke up every day with a note on their mirror in their car at their desk that said, what can I do today to make my team members?
On every leader's desk, very prominently displayed was, what can I do today to make the employee experience better than it was yesterday? And that was kind of like that philosophy drove us. So this was one part of it, and a huge part. I mean, don't let me understate it, but part of a kind of a broader philosophy around culture.
So the ultimate goal was this: we had this crazy amount of turnover, which the industry said was really good. You looked at it and said, why in the hell do we got to be industry average better or slightly better?
Why do we tolerate it? Like, we tolerate it.
And you worked it down to 18%, which obviously drove a huge amount of value. Talk about since this is about Dream On, and I want to get people's questions kind of flowing through here, tell us a little bit about the components of Dream On.
Yeah, so there's a couple kind of, the questions I always get, and I'm sure we'll get them today, are, well, how do you set the program up? What are the rules? Who does what? So I can just kind of walk you through. There's a couple things that are really important if you want this to be successful. Number one is it's not a merit program. So you don't say, well, that's my best employee, so I'm more likely to grant the dream for them than for somebody else. This is really about, and our rule was, you just had to be in good standing with the company. You know, if you're on your second written warning, and which I'll get into my philosophy on mornings and stuff too, but if you're not in good standing, you weren't eligible. Otherwise, everyone was eligible and equal in the program. So it's not merit-based. It's not decision based. So you don't submit a dream and get a yes or no decision back. Some dreams we would get and grant within 24 hours. Some dreams we would get and it took 12 months before. And we would always keep kind of a.
It wasn't quarter by quarter they expired. They hung around.
Yeah. So the overriding thing, if you take nothing else away, the less rules, the better. There was no restriction on the size of the dream or the ask. You could change it if you wanted. So if you put in a dream on request and 4 months later your situation changed and you wanted to change the dream, then you absolutely could change it. You can only have one in at a time. You couldn't, I didn't get, these are the 17 things I'd like to see happen or anything like that. But you had the opportunity to modify them. The committee that decided on whose dreams would get granted was a secret. It wasn't a huge secret. It was me, my executive assistant, and my director of what we called employee experience. You might call it HR. We banned the term HR because it was. We wanted our HR function to understand their number one job was the employee experience as well. So we called it the employee experience department. But it was my director of employee experience, who also happened to be my sister-in-law, my executive assistant, and myself. Those two would screen the submissions, and then the three of us would get together and decide on the ones they thought had merit. What we're going to do.
Okay. Were there ever any times that somebody, I know the less rules, the better?
Good.
I don't know. We just got some flashing going on. Are we still here, Camille?
Yep, we're still here.
Okay. We just had some
technical difficulties on our end.
Maybe they launched a space shuttle or something.
North
Korea is doing something.
Elon's up the street firing his rockets.
Yeah, exactly. Whether less rules better, I think most people hear that and they go, "Great, somebody's going to work the system." Is that? I know it's a concern. Or at least, when did it happen, and what did you guys do?
It's a hard system to work because it's an anonymous committee, and it's really, it's almost a benevolent dictatorship that makes the decisions. I'm sure it happened, but this is another rant of mine on employee experience and culture. I always prescribe to it's 80-20 in most things, but for me in employee experience, it's 90-10. If you can get 80% of the employees engaged, that's great. But 90% of your employees have 90% or more have no inclination to try and game the system or do anything wrong. But we tend to create rules for not even the bottom 10. It's normally the bottom 3 or 4. Like we get outlier employees doing, outlier things. And all of a sudden we have a HR policy book that's this thick and we're trying to modify the behavior of the bottom 3 or 4%. And they're not going to modify their behavior anyway. I know we've talked about this many times.
These guys need to hear it.
Yeah, and so I'm sure it happened, but the benefits were so vast and the negatives were so small. One of the things that always comes up, though, that's I think maybe tangential is, did it demotivate people that didn't have their dreams granted?
So you get 50 of them, you can grant 3.
What happens to the other 47? And it was unbelievable to watch. People would get so excited for their peers when something amazing would happen and a dream got granted. And even if they had one in submission, and this is a big reason why you just keep them in the queue and you don't decision them yes or no. I think if you decision them yes or no, you can create negative impact. But there's all, and we didn't, we weren't trying to string people along. We granted as many as we possibly could. But just having that hope that, maybe mine is next, and I'm really happy for the person next to me. I cannot recall, I've been asked this question literally probably 1,000 times. I cannot recall a single time where it created a jealousy or resentment. And it may have happened, behind the scenes quietly, but it never bubbled up to the point where it was a distraction. And again, we're looking at, even if it did happen, it would be a total outlier, and the positive outcomes were vast. So, but it never came up.
So some of the ways to kind of get this started, a lot of people on this call and watching this later on video will be, all right, what's step 1?
Yeah. So
talked about the committee, how do you roll it out? how did you guys do that?
Yeah, so step one is you got to get philosophically aligned that you own the employee experience. But step 1A then would be who's going to administer it? How are we going to administer it? How will we decision on it? How are we going to decide what our budget is? Who's going to own kind of the 5 or 6 critical decisions? So for us, we spent that second day designing the program. We figured out the secret committee, which was the 3 of us. My team kind of wanted to build a bunch of rules, and I'm anti-rule anyway, so I pushed back on a lot of that. And what we decided on that design day was no limit on the ask. And you'd be amazed how humble most of the asks were. We got very few that were, so outrageous we couldn't grant. And then we'd get a couple that were outrageous, and we would try and use our resources if we could to sort of figure out a way to grant them. We almost pulled it off on one occasion, but for someone wanted a new house, and we actually got America's Home Makeover involved, and she was one of 2 finalists to have a brand new house. Fortunately, she lost, and the way they do that is torture, but that's a whole side story. But, so we would look at the big asks as a challenge, and we would use our resources, as much as we could.
Wait, hit on that just a second, because I've heard you many times, and I know lots of, owners of organizations, they'll strategically use Amex points.
Yeah.
You and I have been in rooms where we've raised lots of money just auctioning off things that we take for granted and don't ever use ourselves. So there are things that we can do that folks in an organization don't have access to. We can just use it.
Exactly. So we used American Express to pay every bill. Every vendor that would take Amex, we would pay with Amex, even if there was a little bit of an upcharge. And we would then, a lot of the Dream On requests were travel related, which you can imagine. And we would use those Amex points a lot of times for travel type stuff. And I'll give you a great example of, and it kind of encompasses the whole thing. It's one of our sort of pinnacle stories about how important this program was at Apple Tree. So we had a frontline supervisor at our office in Portland, Maine, and she had at the time, 5-year-old daughter, and I guess her husband, her daughter's father, abandoned them when her daughter was 4 months old, and they'd not heard from them since. And she was in kindergarten, and she was starting to, go to school and socialize with other kids, and they, she was starting to realize she didn't have a dad, and a lot of other kids, had a dad. And she was starting to ask her mom, like, why and what's going on. And so her mom put in and again, many of the Dream On requests were very, very humble. Her mom put in a humble request that said, hey, I love my daughter. She's really struggling with this. I'd love her to feel like a princess for a day. There's a spa in Portland, and, they specialize in kind of mom, daughter, kid experiences. And we read it, and we're like, yeah, this one's easy. Of course we could, grant this one, and it'd be a layup. And the 3 of us, the secret committee, was together, and we were talking about it. And I go, Disney has that thing called the Bippity Boppity Boutique, where they dress girls up as their favorite princess, and they walk
Literally a princess.
Literally, yeah. And they pick their favorite Disney princess. They get the full costume. Now, it freaks me out a little because they put makeup and stuff on the girls, which is kind of creepy. But the kids, they like the girls that are into Disney princesses. You see them if you go to Disney, walking around literally as like they look like the character in complete, outfit. So I said, what if we sent her to Disney and really made her feel like a princess for a day? So long story short, and this was about as much for us about creating amazing stories as it was, everything else. So we bought 4 plane tickets, 3 nights at a Disney resort, an appointment at the Bippity Boppity Boutique. We got breakfast. We found out ahead of time who her favorite princess was. We got a character breakfast with that princess, and the tickets to the park. We did the entire thing on Amex points. I think it may have cost 200,000 Amex points, like very, very little. And obviously it was like way over and above what the dream request was. So sounds like a great story. They have a great outcome. There's great pictures from it. But what was fascinating was that manager, that frontline supervisor, was 2 or 3 days away from putting in her notice, unbeknownst to her, before her dream was going to get granted, and for $2 more an hour at a competitor that was in town. And we granted her a dream, and she was obviously, blown away by that, and decides that she's going to stay. And this was in 2009 or so. And I know she's still with the company today. She's become a regional leader with them. And, just that one story alone makes, and it kind of tells the story sort of end to end of how we thought about this idea of Dream On. But yeah, that was one.
Retention.
Yeah. And really about not even, like, retention was the unintended positive consequence. We started out trying to reduce turnover. This thing became so much bigger than trying to reduce turnover. It really became a way to honor the people that were showing up to try and make my vision and a reality. And it was kind of our way to figure out, all right, how can we really make their experience great? And some other amazing things come out of Dream On. We've sort of gone out of order a little bit, but one of the things it taught us that we had no idea it was going to teach us was empathy. Specifically empathy between the 3% turnover group and the 115% turnover group, where, before Dream On and kind of just seeing that, kind of the ups and downs of employees, the frontline manager specifically really didn't understand the challenges that the hourly employees were going through. So the example I always give, I think kind of the ultimate example is, and you're probably sick of hearing it, but the flat tire. So, our frontline employees were $14, $15 an hour, some a little bit less. Our managers were probably making, double to triple that, and then our senior executives. So I want you to imagine you have a frontline employee and our CFO both driving to work on the same road. They both hit the same pothole, and they get a flat tire. Now, our CFO has AAA, so she calls AAA, and then they tow it to her dealership where she's got insurance on the tire. And the dealership replaces the tire and then delivers the car back to the office. And they drop her off at the office, and they give her donuts and coffee. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And the frontline employee doesn't have AAA. She's got some friends she has to call to try and get her a ride to work. And the tire is actually a financial crisis now because, it's going to represent a significant part of her paycheck for the week. And it really creates an unbelievable amount of stress for her and disrupts her in ways that are going to have ripple effects. And they both are due at work at 8 a.m. and they both arrive at 8:30. And the CFO gets there. What do we do? Oh, that's terrible. Flat tire. Oh, yeah. Why haven't they fixed that pothole? I hit that thing 2 weeks ago. Well, AAA, how long did it take them to get there? And the dealership took care of it, right? And, and then the hourly employee, same pothole, same tire, same everything. What do we do? Well, you're 30 minutes late. You were due here at 8 o'clock. And I'm sorry. I know there's potholes in the road, but you should have thought of that in advance. And maybe if you try to get here a little ahead of your time, you wouldn't be late. But this is the third time you've been late in 2 months. And you're going to get 3 points on your permanent record, and here's your written warning. And if this happens again, what are we going to do? Fire you. Because you were unfortunate enough to run over pothole. And I know there's people on this webinar right now that are going, yeah, maybe I've done the same thing in the past. So we coddle the one that it's not a big event to, and we rain all over the one that it's a huge event to. And then the last thing we do to the one that we just kind of rained all over and ruined their day after it already got ruined in the beginning was, now go out, sit down, and serve our customer. And you better serve our customer well, because if you don't do that, well, you'll get in trouble another way. So we manage the business completely differently from hourly and salary. And we use fear with hourly, and we used encouragement with salary. And it was totally, it should have been the other way. I mean, you shouldn't use fear on either side. But if you had to pick a side to use fear, it's certainly not the hourly employees. They've already got.
They got plenty of.
Yeah, and dream on, like, I mean, you want to talk about shining a massive spotlight on the different challenges that different groups of employees faced. It was like the most eye-opening part, and we had no idea going in.
Yeah, I've heard you say, I didn't know that people were living in their cars.
Well, so that's
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. You just don't know.
So the ultimate, you asked how did Dream On get started, and this is another great example of the whole class warfare thing that was going on. So we launched the program. First of all, we do what every 3% turnover executive team does. We high-five each other on our brilliance after our quarterly plan. Pat each other on the back. This is the smartest thing we've ever come up with. This is going to be a home run. Some of the other managers, oh yeah, this is brilliant, this is brilliant. And we launched the program, and a week goes by. 650, well, we had 500 at the time. A week goes by, not a single submission to the dreamon@appletreeanswers.com email. And we're all sort of looking at each other like, is the email broken? Like, how could they not be like lining up at our feet to admire our brilliance in this Dream On program? And so we do another marketing blast out to all the employees. Posters up, all the stuff.
So posters and emails.
Posters, emails, one-on-ones with managers, all the stuff.
All those.
Yeah. And so like 3 more days go by, still not a single email. And I'm thinking, all right, something's up, right? So then the first one we ever get, the first Dream On request that ever comes in, it's this incredibly humbly written email that was almost apologetic, that basically said, through a series of circumstances, including a divorce, I and my 2 children are living in our car and have been for the last 2 weeks. And my dream is that my kids don't have to live in a car. Now, a couple things happened from that. Number one, thank God we finally got a dream we can grant, because this one's pretty easy. Number 2, how in the world can I be running a business, own a business, that has a homeless employee working for me? Like, I took it personally that I created this situation. Like, how in the world could they come to work every day and then have that dire situation and not feel like they would come to us? And number 3, it drove a level of empathy once the word got out in dramatic ways. So very simple one to grant. We grant it, and we didn't do much. We put her in a hotel that night. We went out. We helped her find a place. Our manager there helped her find a landlord. We said to the landlord, listen, she's going to do a 1-year lease. If she gets in trouble, I told her myself, call me. We'll work it out. I'll make sure that it works for the year. Here's her pay, and we can do a payroll. Like, we worked that out. We bought some furniture. And 36 hours after we got that email, she moved into her apartment with her kids. But the funny sidebar was, Dream On is 100% confidential.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I'm sure these guys are wondering.
Yeah.
Did you stand in front of the group and go, this is what we did, look at us again? Or
nope.
Yeah.
So one of the rules of Dream On was 100% confidential. We wouldn't share anything about anyone's dream before, during, or after. It was up to them to share or not share. The only thing we would say was a dream's been granted in St. Louis, a dream's been granted in Sacramento, whatever office they were working out of. But we didn't share any detail. So we said to her, hey, listen, and she was, obviously beside herself and excited to move into this apartment and everything else. And we said, it's confidential. We're not going to share it. And she said to us, not share it. I'm telling anyone that'll listen. This is like, the companies don't do this. This is the most amazing thing ever. So she, when we had social media throughout the company, they could communicate. It went like wildfire. And then you want to get humbled, like really humbled. The next dream was the similar situation. Mom and 1 daughter living in their pickup truck. Same thing, divorce and some other stuff. So we go through the same process. She's now telling everybody, and then the floodgates open. We probably had, from that point, over the next quarter, maybe 2 quarters, we probably had 100 dream submissions. And now we're granting them, like, just get the list. Let's grant as many as we possibly can. And it went like crazy from there.
So you had to build the trust that this was a real thing. It took some time. Somebody had to step into the little bit of, the darkness. And she did you a big favor by getting it started.
She did.
And then by sharing that information, that made it okay for everybody else to do.
Yeah, that's correct. And just wow, this thing's real. It's not another, because we were guilty a little bit of flavor of the week culture stuff. So, hey, I hear it's, if you buy fruit and you put fruit in all your offices for your employees, you have great culture. Well, when you buy fruit and you treat them like crap every other way, they're like, yeah,
It's a combination of a bunch of
stuff. Exactly.
So let's get some questions going. We've had a lot of dialogue this morning, listening to John talk through this program. I know people have questions. Camille, can you see any questions yet?
Yes.
Anything in the chat?
We've got Mr. Perez has his hand raised. So, Joe, did you have a question? You'll have to unmute yourself. Let me see. Joe, did you have a question?
Hey, I appreciate the webinar. First of all, I sent a question. Basically, how did you, with 500 employees, what process did you use to identify your employees? First of all, I mean, we're all as entrepreneurs and business owners want to find the right people for the right job, put them in place and train them, obviously. But, some things that I've been experiencing is that, a lot of folks are working in jobs they don't like. And so because they don't like it, they're not going to do their best or whatnot. I see how this program is definitely will entice people to stick around. And that gives them a level of or desire to stay with the company because they care about them. And that's one big thing. But how did you find the right folks to put into the right seats? At least to start with, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and certainly it was a work in progress over time, and I'm not sure we ever got it perfect. And again, our goal was 80% right, and you're way ahead of your peers. One of the things we did, part of this whole initiative around driving down turnover and driving up culture was a whole series of things, not just Fremont. And we got to be incredibly serious about core values. Core values became part of our daily DNA. And I can tell you, just kind of as a takeaway from this, one of the most important things we ever did to start to get better at finding the right people for the right jobs was we had an online application for every job in the company, whether it was frontline, call center agent, all the way up to the C-suite. They would start out, they were different, but they would start out in an online application, and then they'd move through the process from there. And we were getting a lot of good word of mouth, but we were generating almost too many applicants. And so in an effort to help screen people out up front, just because of the overwhelm, we made the first question on our job application. It said, these are the 7 core values we have at Appletree, and it would list them. Pick one of these 7 and tell us a story when you lived that value personally or professionally. And then in parentheses, after it said question 1, in parentheses afterwards it said optional. It wasn't optional. It was the fastest way to opt out of ever working for us. But it really kind of gave us insight on culture fit up front. We got way better when we started hiring for culture fit in as the first screening tool, not after we vetted a candidate as the last screening tool. The other thing that we were pretty devoted to, and we had a flavor of it for every level of hire, was the top grading methodology. So real rigor around the interview process, the reference check process, and I know, Andy, you guys do some stuff with top grading, right? Yeah. And that's kind of a whole, email Andy if you have questions on top grading. But yeah, those were some of the things that we did to screen out and get the right people in the right jobs. I will say this on some people are in a job they don't like. I agree with that to an extent, and there are parts of jobs that are unpleasant. But a lot of what makes the call center jobs unpleasant were things we felt like we could mitigate. So we did 24 acquisitions on the buy side, and bought 24 different call centers around the U.S. And almost every single time when we walked in, the employees were sitting in office chairs you wouldn't put your worst enemy in. And we finally figured out the world's best office chair is the Herman Miller. Well, people will debate me, but the one that's recognized as the best is the Herman Miller Aeron office chair. Every frontline employee at our company was in an Aeron chair. A lot of call centers have old, lousy headsets and you can't hear the call, and keys are coming off the keyboard, and computers don't boot up right, and they lock up. And technology really frustrates call center frontline people. So we made sure that their technology was pristine. Everything we could do to enhance that frontline employee experience and make it a little bit easier and make them not hate the job. A lot of places are so tight on costs, they don't allow overtime, so you can't switch shifts with another employee. We didn't care if it made the experience better and we had to pay a little bit of overtime, we were happy to do that. And subsequently, our margins, because our turnover got so low, our margins were insane. We had 61% gross margin and about 21% EBITDA. We were more than happy to spend whatever it took on employee engagement because the returns were so high. And sometimes overtime is an employee engagement incentive driver, whether it's two employees that can switch a shift to help each other out, or someone needs extra money or whatever it is. We get so wrapped up on the cost side, I think we completely forget about the cost of turnover. And if overtime is something that you're hyper focused on, you're turning people over, something to think about too.
Hopefully that's helpful, Joe. Any follow-up questions, or Camille?
Well, I mean, that was awesome. I appreciate that. And I got a couple of good notes off of just that interchange there. Thanks.
No problem.
That's the only question.
Camille, you have other?
Now. Any other questions? If you have a question, you can raise your hand on your control panel, or you can type in a chat on your control panel. There's also a questions tab on your control panel.
Yeah, while we do that, Andy, why don't we just, I really want to get back to this idea that I believe that, if you look at the history of business in the U.S. over the last 20, 50, 100 years, we've changed so dramatically. And I think a lot of us don't recognize that the changes are taking place as rapidly as they are. And even 20 years ago, technology could still be a competitive advantage. You could have, you could be a bank or a hospital or a Fortune 500 company, and you could out-technology your competitor, and the barriers to entry were so high, the capital costs were high. You could have strategic partnership, competitive advantages, and we're watching in real time competitive advantage erode in American business across all the traditional kind of spectrum. The one place that I think is a long-term sustainable competitive advantage is around employee engagement and culture. And the way to think about it is like DNA. It's like a fingerprint. That no other company can copy your company's employee engagement and culture. And if you can get a room full, a group full, a company full of people that are so bought in to being part of something bigger than themselves and ready to run through a wall and really engage with the brand at an emotional level themselves, you have a long-term sustainable competitive advantage for as long as you can maintain that level. Yeah, no, this is a process, not an event. Yeah, no, you don't do Dream On. You have Dream On as part of your philosophy. You don't do culture, you have and create and own culture over time. And this idea that this 1956 premise that, well, we give them a great paycheck and we give them a good place to work, so we deserve their best effort when they get here. If you're thinking that way, forget it. I mean, they have the ability at any moment in time through a smartphone and through technology to work on anything they want to work on. They can either work on things for themselves or they can work for you. I forget who said it, but it might have been Aubrey Daniels, that employees have about 40% of their total capacity as discretionary effort. So you'll get on average about 60% just because they're there to do the basics. But then there's 40% discretionary, and they have unlimited choice how to spend that 40% of their discretionary effort. And if you've given them something bigger than themselves to be a part of, and they really feel engaged and deeply committed, you'll get a lot of that 40%. And if not, it'll go to Facebook, it'll go to them, it'll go to distractions.
So along those same lines then, with Dream On specifically, you started Dream On, so we met in 2005, I guess, 2006 timeframe. We graduated EMP program in 2008. When did Dream On start?
I believe, I really need to get, I'm 95% sure it was the third quarter of 08. It might have been the fourth quarter of 08, but it was in the end of 2008.
Okay, so 2008, 2009, you exited your company in 2012.
2012.
So you had about a 4-year run.
Yep.
With Dream On, with that same premise of it's a perpetual, continual thing. What changed with Dream On in that 4-year period? Was it exactly the same when you exited as it was when you started the same program? Did you change anything? Did you do anything different other than we gave a lot more, granted a lot more dreams?
Well, yeah, and what's interesting, it did not change a lot actually, because we got lucky, I guess, and got the model pretty close. From the beginning, the one thing that changed was we stopped measuring the ROI and we stopped worrying about the budget. And it was really about, the returns on this are so high, let's just grant as many as we can. And the size of the dreams we started granting went up. So it was a lot in the beginning to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a dream. It was nothing getting towards the end to spend $9,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 on a dream, just because the returns were astronomical.
And how much of your budget for this was points and access? You talked in the past about the football, the Eagles access. You had it.
Yeah.
You just gave it to somebody else as part of it, souped it up a little bit. How much was cash versus?
I would say over 50% was non-cash. It was either points or creating experiences. We had an employee that wanted to have lunch with the guy that wrote SimCity, the software program. I happen to know a couple people who know a friend of a friend, and we were able to make that happen. Just random stuff like that. And then we started to have people that peers of mine that said, "Hey, I love this. We have one mutual friend who's got a resort in Costa Rica, and he knew we did a lot of honeymoons. He said, listen, if you ever have a honeymoon, I would be honored if I could donate a week at my resort in Costa Rica to Dream On, and you can send anyone you want down there." So, it became kind of a movement, and then it was really starting to kind of hit its peak around the time we exited. So, we had a good year with it in 09, but 10 and 11 were amazing, and then, we exited in 12. So, and the diversity of the stories. We bought headstones for employees that, had lost a grandparent and their family couldn't afford a headstone. We threw a 40th anniversary party for an employee that I'd never met, and to this day still haven't met, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her parents were celebrating their 40th. And we were at that, and we thought, this is the cool, this is awesome. 200 people at a country club in Cincinnati, Ohio, went to a 40th wedding anniversary of an employee that I've never met. So just amazing stories came out. And that's a really, and it's the first time I think I've been interviewed on this hundreds of times, but it really was about the story. The stories were what gave this thing life and really made it powerful. This wasn't, we would get the occasional, I'd love to have an Xbox. That's my dream. This wasn't like I want a gift program. This is like, I got this thing going on in my life, and you can really, create an amazing experience, and you can help me with it. Pretty cool.
So I know, any other questions coming in?
No, not at this
All right. So I know that from your perspective, you have just through, our Petra members, we have a half a dozen or more companies that have implemented that. You've been gracious with your time and gone one-on-one with them and answered questions. I know it's one of your long-term visions is to get as many companies doing this as possible. Talk a little bit about what you want to see happen with Dream On long-term.
Yeah, so I think it's even more important to back up a step. With any good, or we thought it was good because we had great results from it, but with any program, you're going to put it out in the world and people are going to try it, and the fear I have is it doesn't work somewhere, and knock on wood or whatever you want to say, but probably I've given keynotes on this, and there's probably over 100 companies now that have implemented Dream On, and I'm yet to have someone come back to me and say it was a good idea, but it didn't really work here. And we've actually had it implemented. Interestingly enough, people kind of misinterpret it and think it's for companies that have hourly employees. And there's a guy that runs an engineering company, and I think, and I hope he's not one of them. I hope no one puts the pieces together, but he's got a team of about 100, and minus their receptionist, every employee in the company makes over 6 figures. And he was interested in it and saw me give a keynote on it, and we talked. And he said, "Yeah, I get it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it would really work at my place because my people can kind of do whatever they want to do anyway." And I was like, "Well, there's no downside in giving it a shot." He's like one of the biggest zealots for it, totally blown away by what he learned about, because that's one of the great, by reading all these dreams, you really get a sense of what's going on in the lives of your employees. He got more insight, and he came back and said a lot of the people that he thought were in great shape and managed their finances well and everything had created, success creates some problems too. And so this is not a hourly employee. This is really about someone that's got a company that believes deeply that you own the experience of the employee, and it's an incredible way to connect to that idea that you can help create amazing experiences for employees. And I've seen other flavors on it too. I know Cameron Harold talks about an idea, and we kind of have discussed this in the past. And his is if you make a bucket list of 100 things, and you give it to me as your employer, I will personally make sure that one of those 100 come true. There's lots of variations on it. The companies that have been successful, we found, are the ones that have done it the way that we talked about doing it. But there's always ways to modify it. And but I can tell you that the stories that I get when people will come up to me and say, "Hey, we put this in place," and I can't tell you how successful it's been.
Rob's got a question about what would you do differently given the opportunity to do it all over again?
It's a really good question.
He always tends to put questions out that make you slow down a little bit.
Is that Rob?
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. It's a question I've never been asked. I probably would have been more aggressive in granting more dreams. I think we got, we were a little nervous in the beginning. We probably got off to a little bit of a slow start, and we probably left some things on the table that if I had to do over again, I would do it in a heartbeat. A couple of them stick with me that, I think back and I think, oh, we should have done this or we should have done that from a dream granting standpoint. I really wouldn't have changed much from a structure standpoint. Again, we got really lucky, but I think we nailed the service delivery part of it from the beginning.
And keeping it simple, not too many rules, committee, submitted them via email to an email address.
Yep.
You sat down once a quarter with your committee and went through them.
Oh, no, sorry. No, they would read the submission as they came in.
Okay.
And it was an ongoing decisioning process.
Oh, so it was all perpetual?
Yeah, because a lot of them would be time sensitive.
Okay.
No, that email was monitored every day. And if something came in that those two thought I needed to be made aware of, they'd make me aware of it that day.
All right, cool.
Sorry.
So it was just perpetual.
Perpetual. Now we would, there would be times where I'd say, hey, we need a really good dream, and we'd go. They'd say, well, we have that one from 6 months ago, and then we would go and do that. But no decision. That's the number one rule. Is this is not a yes or no. You don't say your dream's been granted or denied. It's just we have your dream, and we'll put it under. Now the time sensitive ones, obviously,
Sure,
by definition, get denied. But you'll find most of the time sensitive ones are relatively easy to grant, and you end up granting them anyway. I hit a bottle and it's 4 new tires for my car.
No, I had it on my phone because I couldn't hear.
All right, that looks like all the questions we have. Camille, do you have anything else? Let's see. Donald kept one. Did he set up a separate entity for Dream On projects? I'm looking at this from the tax side of things. I know I've been at tables where we've had this conversation before. I joined late due to technical difficulties. Apologize. So the question is around: do you have a separate entity? Let me ask the different question that other people are going to ask eventually anyway. Is did you tax the people on the gifts that you gave them? Because I know you have that conversation.
All right, so this is forum confidential. There's 2 ways you can do it. One is you can say, you know what, we're doing this program, screw the tax. And that's how we did it. We just sort of did it without worrying about the tax implications. It was small enough normally per employee. There were times where if it were big enough and we were worried, and my CFO we sort of followed maybe the 1099 rules times 2 or 3, and that was her trigger. If it were $5,000 or $6,000, we would do it through a payroll adjustment, and we would gross them up and include the tax. Got it. So if we were going to give them a $5,000 vacation and their tax implications were 25%, we might give them $6,250 in their paycheck, or give them the tax in their paycheck and then take it out. But the vast majority of times we didn't do anything with the taxes. I know you can all tell me that was a dumb idea. I can tell you in 4.5 years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dreams was never an issue. It's such a small.
So consult your local tax.
Yeah. I'm not
tax
a CPA.
advisor on that question.
Thank you for bailing me out.
Yeah. Let's see. And here's Rob's question: were there any tax implications? So, yeah. Again.
Yeah.
Call Greg Crabtree. He'll answer that.
Here's what I will say: that it's so unbelievably effective and beneficial, and I would have paid all the tax on everything, and it's still our ROI. We stopped measuring ROI when it got to about 30 to 1. $30 for every dollar we spent in return. We just gave up, and I'm sure it was even higher than that. We were in the call center business with 61% gross margins, which is crazy, and 21.5% EBITDA when we sold. And the reason we were able to do that was our turnover costs were so low, so we weren't spending money on constantly recruiting
and training and onboarding and all this stuff.
Our customer retention in an industry where if you keep 2/3 of your customers every year, again, you're killing the industry average. We were at 92% customer retention. Like, customer acquisition costs in the boutique call center space are massive, and we were able to cut a lot of those out. Word of mouth, referral, like the trickle down benefits from this program were so great that I would have gladly paid all the tax.
The keystone of all of that was having a long-term tenured, good person in a job that was excited about coming to work every day, so they served the client well.
Yeah, exactly, and felt good about. It's kind of like millennials would love to have a cause at work, and our joke was always, and it's not even a joke. It's why not make the cause your own people? Like, why do we have to have an external cause? Why not make the cause everyone here? And that's kind of what this turned into. Was the cause was the people that were there. So
I think that's a really good place to wrap this up.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody for being on the call today. It looks like we've gotten through all the questions. Camille, any final thoughts? Anything at all?
We do have one more question from Mr. Simons. Have you heard of someone doing the Dream On program with professional services organizations, also known as higher paid salary employees, and having the same success as compared to call center workers?
Yeah,
We just had that discussion about the engineering firm.
we addressed it, but I can tell you, even beyond the engineering firm, without a shadow of a doubt, it worked. So there's this mystique there, or myth, that, you know, because someone makes six figures, they've got all their stuff together and their finances are in order. And oftentimes you'll find that subset of employees has created an even bigger mess because they, you know, I think they have more resources than they do, and they use debt. They have access to debt differently than you know, a different strata of employee, and it absolutely works across the entire spectrum. And it may even be more effective in the higher salary professional services front than the front line, which sounds counterintuitive. But the other thing to think about here is, you know, if you have a $15 an hour frontline call center employee, we could debate it, but their replacement cost is probably somewhere in the $5,000 to $10,000, maybe $15,000 range. If you have a $100,000 professional services person, their replacement cost is in the $50,000 to $100,000 range, and one extra employee that you're able to retain through this program relative to is exponentially higher for the higher salary employee. So it makes even more sense to try and keep that group. Yeah, this is not a you know, frontline employee program by any stretch. This is definitely
not only
right. This is definitely a company wide, and it works. And it's industry agnostic. It's company size. There's companies as small as 5 people that have done it, and there's companies with 500 to 1,000 people that have done it.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
We're going to leave the house here in just a little bit and come back this afternoon, bring a bunch of CEOs in here and work with them for a few days. So I'm excited to work with you on that project.
Yeah,
as well.
that's always fun.
If we can do anything, obviously, to help you guys at any time, whether it be with Dream On or any other aspect of Rockefeller Habits and what you've read in all the books and seen online, give us a call. Thanks, Camille, for setting this all up today and being here with us.
One final thing I'll say. Yeah. So my sister-in-law who ran this program for us, it's still her passion. So anyone that wants one-on-one kind of nuts and bolts on how to set it up, mechanics-wise, if they just reach out to Camille, we can put them in touch with Emily, and she'll spend as much time as they want.
Okay.
Yeah,
Appreciate
she loves doing that. Yes. So appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your weeks. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.